my fellas, all 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 my fellas, let's go. Let's go. All my fellas. All my fellas. Let's go. Pose the camera.
Hey y'all, Mac here. Today I wanted to share my bunny build, which turns her into what I consider to be the best mobber in the game currently, with no competition. This build is going to emphasize her 2, which is her run ability, and her 3, her electric AoE ability, maximizing the range and damage of this ability, and giving her permanent run through bionic fuel. This build is designed to clear the hard mode missions, which give amorphous materials, and yes, it can down bosses, as well as farming open world missions for Kuiper and gold as efficiently as possible. Before I get into it, I'd like to give a shout out to Jue. He heavily inspired my theory crafting for this build, and I adjusted a couple things, but I took a lot of inspiration from his techniques to maximize the speed of Bunny, and I will go over those later in this video. I think he's a great theory crafter, and I highly recommend you check out his channel if you are seeking to build Bunny, because he has built her in several different ways for various content. Okay, so the modules for this build, as you can see, require every single slot except for the Transcendant mod to be 4 mode. The Transcendent mod can be left open in case you want to build the bunny with a different Transcendent mod, for instance high voltage, which might be good for bossing. Now, that being said, it is, as you can tell, a very expensive build. You don't need everything 4 mode, and there is a budget version, which I will review, but this is the full total setup for maximum range. So, first off, we are using long distance maneuvering, which allows us to grapple much longer. This helps us go from pack to pack in case we need to travel to a more distant pack. As far as cooldown scaling goes, we only need 1 skill cooldown because of the reactor that I'm running on Bunny. And this gets us to a breakpoint where our lightning emission, our 3, has a higher duration than cooldown, and that's really all we need. Realistically, you might need to run a max rank MP conversion, or you might need to run Nimble Fingers along with a skill CD skill duration reactor, but I will go over this later. For defensives, we are running increased shield and HP conversion. Because this build constantly drains HP, there's no real reason to have health, and stacking it along with defense is just too costly if we want to build enough damage for our ability just to melt everything else. As such, we are building probably what I still consider to be the worst defensive option in the game, but nevertheless, something that we can kind of rely on to avoid getting one-shot. And that's the big thing with this build. You're avoiding the one-shots as best as you can, and you're using your movement as your primary defense. This build is the epitome of hit and don't get hit. And so again, we don't need HP, we are just scaling our shields. Now, for damage, we are looking at skill amplification, which again drains more MP for higher skill power. and Electric Specialist because these are electric spells. And this is going to give us a lot more damage. If we could have focus on singular and focus on electric and all, I would scale skill power over crit. But our next option for scaling damage is going to be skill crit and skill crit damage. So we have front lines, emergency measure, and skill insight. Lastly, to scale the range to the ridiculous amount that it is, essentially capped, we're taking maximize range and skill expansion. Now, looking at these, they're both maxed. I might be slightly overcapped on these, but there's not really any wiggle room anyways, and I still need the rest of these mods. So having this little bit of extra just means I could theoretically get a better reactor. But at the same time, I also want duration on that reactor. So there's not really that much settling to do there. Bionic Fuel is necessary for this iteration of the build. You aren't using any mana, instead you're draining health. So this is a necessary mod. How you acquire it is through either hard mode Frostwalker or by combining Transcendent mods or even these ultimate mods and getting lucky. So when I talk about budget when referring to this build, I'm more so talking about the mods that you want to least prioritize. So that right here is going to be crit. You can drop all the crit because the crit scaling, while the base crit chance is 10%, the actual scaling itself still only scales it up to around 30%. So the actual value from crit is good, but it's not enough to warrant putting that over other mods. So as you can see here, we really want the shield because otherwise every stray bullet's going to nearly one-tap you, and we still want the range because that's the entire point of this build. We want the maximum uptime on our 3, and so we're keeping this MP conversion. And of course, Bionic Fuel is just something that I think this build really needs to actually excel. Without Bionic Fuel, you're going to be running out of mana, which means you're going to not be running, which means you're going to be forced to either roll or just normal sprint. And that doesn't really feel all that fast, to be honest. So I really do recommend that you kind of fish for this mod if you're willing to give up some other Transcendent mods or Ultimate mods that you have spare. Now, let's move on to weapons. So the only weapon that actually matters for this build is going to be the Millennium Frost. And that's because it gives us the highest move speed out of any weapon. And this move speed translates to more procs with R3, which means more overall damage from this ability. Now, for reference, you can click F1 while hovering over a weapon to see its move speed. The Tamer has a 350 move speed, while the Millennium Frost has a 675 base move speed. And so, this weapon is going to give you the highest speed in general for running, and that's also going to feel nice for clearing missions very fast. As far as modules on this weapon go, there's only one that really matters, and that's going to be Brisk Walk. This gives us 10% move speed for 5 seconds whenever we hit an enemy, and fun fact, this does proc off of our ability 3 hit. And as such, we get a 10% move speed, but every 5 seconds with a effective cooldown of 10 seconds. Now, I also run better weapon rate, just so I can swap out to the Tamer in case I do need to shoot something, but for the most part, I can just run around and clear everything that way. I almost never switch to these weapons. Alright, so for the Reactor, you have several options. The main thing is you want to make sure you're fulfilling the optimization condition to either hit 140% for rare reactors or 160% for ultimate reactors. Now, in my personal opinion, if you're looking to do more single target on Bonnie, using Thunder Cage and having that optimization with a 160% ultimate reactor is probably going to be better, but it's also harder to farm these if you are looking for a specific weapon. On the contrary, rare reactors are much easier to just get going, and you can fulfill the condition by just equipping whatever weapon. You don't need to have that weapon in your hand, and as such, we can also have this handgun in our hand and thus be faster overall. The elements that you want for your boost ratio are going to be electric and singular because these are the tags for your skills. You can find the tags for your skills by going to Descendant module, and you can check by hovering over. Now, these reactors have several substats that work for this build. The primary substats that you want are duration or cooldown for your skill. Skill fetch range is nice to hit the 2 2.0 maximum. However, if you are willing to sacrifice a little bit of skill range, or if you want to build duration or cooldown in your modules, you can get skill crit rate or skill crit damage as additional lines on your substats, or you can get electric or singular power boost. All of these are completely functional and they work really well. However, having duration is really nice, especially at max rank, because it allows us to not have to run all that many duration mods. In fact, only one in our modules. So for our external components, we are going to be running the Supernova set. This gives us a little bit of extra skill power, as well as a proc that does a decent bit of damage and helps our single target damage. Note that this can also crit, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, this gives us 2 shield and 2 defense components, and what you want for substats on these are honestly just any drop rate boosters. So equipment, module, gold, Kuiper shard are all really nice to have because you're farming mostly open world with Bunny. Now that being said, if you can get max shield or resistances, those are options as well, but I also highly recommend having shield recovery in combat because this helps us regen our shield when we're in combat. Alright guys, so how Bunny works is basically she builds electric charge, her bottom bar, by covering distance. And this electric charge buildup, as well as her overall damage from her 3, depends on how fast you are moving. And in order to increase your speed, you use her 2. Normally this 2 drains mana, but with Bionic Fuel, it drains our HP to a certain threshold. The nice thing about Bionic Fuel is that it doesn't drain past a certain threshold, and we still keep our 2 moving, meaning this is going to be a permanent run, thus being overall faster than the short bursts of speed that you get from the mana version. Now, when you use her 3, you can see it emits lightning pulses around us, and if we are running slower, it's going to emit them slower. Similarly, if we're using this handgun, and we, let's say, proc our brisk walk right here, we're going to be emitting even faster. But if we swap to something like the tamer, you can see that the proc rate immediately goes down, even though we're running with our 2 as well. So having a weapon that allows you to run even faster means more procs with your 3, and more triggers with your 3 means more damage overall, and it also procs our 4-set external component bonus as well. Anyway guys, I hope this build guide was helpful. I hope that some of you guys are able to experiment more with this character. But for the most part, I feel like she's just a really nice unit to use to farm all the content that you need to funnel into bossing. And obviously, you're going to want a Descendant for bossing besides Bunny, unless, of course, you want to build her as a bosser as well, which, again, as I mentioned, there are options to do so. Now, my next plans are going to be to build into Ultimate Lepic, and there's going to be a bossing build using him, and I will also have a Glay launcher build to demonstrate. Though that build, I'm going to preface right away, is not a great build. It is just very cheap to set up and functions as a decent bosser at best. But hope you guys enjoyed. Till next time, ciao.